The smell of burnt crust clung to the air like a stubborn memory. Charity stood barefoot in her tiny kitchen, staring at the edges of a ruined tart that had been her last order for the day. The cracked tiles under her feet were cold. The faded yellow walls reflected the quiet exhaustion in her eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scraped the crust off the pan, her pregnant belly brushing lightly against the counter. 7 months in, and she was still hiding it from everyone except Marcus. Her bakery, her pride, had dwindled into a home-based operation since the divorce. Customers were few. Bills came in faster than cake orders. And yet she pressed on. She always did. Baking had once been her escape, a dream she shared with Mario when they were still us. Now it was her survival. Charity paused for a moment, resting one flour-covered hand on her belly. "We're okay," she whispered. "You and me. That's all we need." Her voice cracked with a softness she hadn't used in months. Her eyes flicked to the old wedding photo still wedged between cookbooks on the shelf. She hadn't found the strength to toss it. In it, Mario's smile was wide, his eyes looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. Now, she wondered who occupied that space in his eyes. She hadn't heard from him in over a year, and honestly, she didn't want to. Not really. But every quiet night, she'd glance toward the door, half hoping, half dreading. A soft knock brought her back to the present. Marcus stood in the doorway with his usual worried expression. "You burned it again?" he asked gently. Charity nodded, pressing the pan to the sink without looking at him. "That crust had a memory I didn't want to keep," she muttered. Marcus didn't press. He walked over and gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Neither of them said what was on their minds. The weight of the baby, the silence of her ex-husband, and the uncertainty looming like a storm cloud overhead. Mario adjusted the cufflinks on his crisp white shirt as his reflection stared back at him from the tall mirror. The custom-tailored wedding suit hugged his frame perfectly, but his eyes lacked the joy one would expect on a groom's face. A knock came at the door. 10 minutes till the final fitting, Rose called softly from the hallway. "Be right there," he replied, masking the hesitation in his voice. As the door closed behind her, he let out a long breath. His fingers reached into the drawer, pulling out a forgotten phone, the one he hadn't used in over a year. His screen lit up with old voicemails. Most were from his mother, but one. One was from Charity, left just a few weeks after their divorce. He hadn't dared listen to it before. He did now. "Mario, I'm not calling to beg. I just thought you should know I'm not okay. But I will be. Don't worry, I won't call again." The message ended, but the ache it left behind stayed lodged in his chest. He tossed the phone back into the drawer like it had burned him. Memories of late-night arguments flooded his mind. Charity had started pulling away first, hadn't she? She'd stopped dreaming, stopped laughing. Or had it been him who pulled away the moment she brought up children? He'd never wanted kids. Too messy, too permanent. And Charity, she wanted a bakery full of them. They had both changed, hadn't they? But why, even now, did his chest tighten every time he thought of her? "Mario!" Rose reappeared, this time walking in. She looked beautiful, radiant even in her satin blouse and curls pinned back. "You look sharp," she smiled, adjusting his collar. "Second time lucky, huh?" she teased lightly. He gave a hollow chuckle. "Yeah, lucky." But the irony wasn't lost on him. Charity had never needed luck. She had needed love, understanding, patience. And maybe he hadn't known how to give any of that. Not back then. The morning was quiet except for the gentle hum of the mixer and the rustling of receipts on the counter. Charity wiped her brow with the back of her wrist as she scanned the last invoice in her inbox. Then her eyes froze. An email with the subject line, "Urgent 3-tier custom wedding cake needed Saturday, high budget." Her heart skipped. She clicked it open and read through it. Elegant script, attached references, and a deposit that could clear 2 months' rent. No name, just a bride signing off as R. Blake. "That's odd," she murmured, tilting her head. She had worked weddings before, but clients almost always led with names. Still, her bakery was no longer in a position to be picky. She scrolled through the references and specifications, carrot and almond sponge, champagne frosting, floral embellishments with edible pearls. It was the kind of cake she hadn't made since her boutique bakery days. Marcus leaned in from the kitchen door, towel draped over his shoulder. "Another unpaid invoice?" he asked. Charity shook her head slowly. "Wedding cake, big one, pays well." Marcus walked over, scanning the email with her. "Anonymous client?" He raised an eyebrow. "Kinda," she replied. "Bride's initials are Blake." Marcus paused. "Wait, Blake is in Rose Blake." Charity's face stiffened, but she quickly masked it with a shrug. "Could be anyone," she lied. Marcus frowned, sensing the subtle shift in her demeanor. "You sure you want to do this?" Charity looked at the order again. Her eyes softened at the sight of the nursery corner she was trying to finish, the one she couldn't afford to paint yet. "I need the money," she whispered. That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of the order, but because a voice inside her kept whispering, "What if it's her?" And worse still, what if it's him too? The next morning, the smell of sugar and ground almonds filled the air as Charity carefully measured each ingredient with trembling hands. Every motion in the kitchen felt more deliberate than usual, as though she was sculpting not just a cake, but a memory. As she mixed the batter, her eyes kept drifting to the pink and gold baby planner she kept tucked beside the microwave. She hadn't filled in the father's name. She told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was finishing the order, getting paid, and buying the crib she had seen at the thrift store last week. "Don't overmix it," Marcus called out, breaking her trance. She blinked, realizing the batter was nearly curdling from the delay. "Thanks," she mumbled. He watched her quietly for a moment, then asked, "You've been distant since that email came in. You sure you're okay with this?" She nodded too quickly. "It's just a cake, Marcus." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. As she piped the soft, champagne-hued frosting onto the bottom tier, tears welled in her eyes. She wiped them quickly, not wanting Marcus to see. Each rose-shaped swirl reminded her of the ones she made for her wedding cake years ago. The one Mario had loved so much he refused to cut it at first. "It's too pretty to destroy," he had joked. And now here she was, making another cake for someone else's forever. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She wasn't even invited, she was the help now. As she moved on to the next layer, her hand froze. The initials, R. Blake. There was a swirl in her chest, a nagging voice that said she already knew the truth. She stared at the near-complete cake and whispered, "God, please don't let it be them." But she already knew that prayers made in kitchens often went unanswered. The frosting was setting when Charity found herself staring at the old photo album wedged in the corner of her bookshelf. She hadn't touched it since her separation from Mario, but something about this cake, these initials, had unearthed the ghosts of a life she had tried to bury. With hesitant fingers, she flipped open the album. There, stuck between pictures of wedding cake samples and cupcake fairs, was a photo of her and Rose, arms wrapped around each other, laughing with flour smudges on their cheeks. It had been taken during a baking contest they both entered before Charity got married. Rose had always been more friend than competition. "You and me forever," Rose had said, grinning, "till we're old and rolling out dough with our grandkids." Charity closed the album slowly, her hand resting on the glossy surface. The memory was warm but tainted now, like a sweet gone stale. Why had Rose vanished so quickly after the divorce? Marcus walked into the room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He noticed the album and paused. "You thinking about her again?" he asked gently. Charity didn't answer immediately. "She helped me pack when Mario moved out," she said finally. "She sat on the floor with me, made cocoa, held me while I cried. Then she disappeared." Marcus sat beside her, voice low. Maybe it was too hard for her to stay in the middle of it. Charity looked at him sharply. She promised she wasn't in the middle. She promised she didn't have feelings for him. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus exhaled. "Do you think that cake might be hers?" Charity stared ahead, unmoving. "I don't know. But if it is, I need to see it with my own eyes." And just like that, a decision was forming in her heart. She didn't know what she'd say if it was Rose. But the thought of delivering that cake without knowing the truth, it gnawed at her more than any betrayal ever could. It was a rainy Thursday when Charity received the call that unraveled everything. She was in the middle of applying sugar pearls to the top tier when her phone rang, loud and shrill. "Hello," she answered, trying not to sound breathless. Hi, this is Abigail Blake, a confident, clipped voice responded. I'm coordinating the Blake Lombardo wedding this weekend. Just confirming delivery details for the cake. Charity's hand stopped midair. Lombardo, she echoed, her voice tight. Yes, Mario Lombardo. You must have it noted somewhere, right? Abigail replied casually, unaware of the earthquake her words had caused. Charity could barely keep the phone steady. Right, of course, she murmured. As the call ended, she stood frozen, her breath caught between her ribs like a sharp pin. Marcus found her minutes later, still staring at her phone. What happened? He asked, alarmed. She handed him the phone. It's his wedding, she whispered. Mario's. Marcus's eyes widened. Are you serious? That's the groom. She nodded. And the bride, she's a Blake. Rose Blake. It's her. Marcus looked like he wanted to throw the cake out the window. You're not going. I'll deliver it. You're not putting yourself through that. But Charity stood, calm now, strangely resolved. No, I have to see it for myself. I need to look her in the eye. Marcus grabbed her wrist, gentler than his words. Charity, what if it breaks you? She met his gaze. Then let it. But I'm not going to hide anymore. And just like that, her plan shifted from quiet exit to something more courageous, a confrontation wrapped in frosting and truth. Charity stood in front of her mirror the morning of the wedding delivery, smoothing the wrinkles from her loose, navy blue dress. Her baby bump was more noticeable now, and for a fleeting second, she considered wearing something darker to hide it better. No, she whispered to her reflection, you're not hiding anymore. She pulled her hair back into a soft bun and applied minimal makeup, enough to look presentable, not enough to pretend. Her eyes were tired but steady. She had rehearsed everything in her mind, smile politely, drop off the cake, don't make eye contact, and leave. Yet underneath the surface, her heart pounded with unease. She wasn't going there as a guest, just a vendor, but the weight of who she was in their story made her presence feel louder than any music that might play that day. Marcus helped her load the cake into the delivery van, holding each tear like it was sacred. You don't have to do this, he said again, his voice almost pleading. You can still call it off. Charity gave him a soft, sad smile. I'm not going for drama. I need to see how far they were willing to go behind my back. As they drove, the city blurred past in silence. The wedding venue was perched on a hill, a pristine white estate wrapped in rose garlands and luxury. She parked far from the entrance, not wanting to draw attention. With practiced care, she rolled the cake trolley through the side gate and into the reception hall. Her presence was unnoticed among the decorators and servers. She was the help now, the invisible baker, but her steps were firm. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to witness, to leave behind the truth, quietly and permanently. The estate was grander than Charity had imagined. Tall marble columns framed the entrance, and white petals lined the pathway like snowfall trapped in spring. Charity pushed the silver cart forward, the wheels squeaking softly against the tiled floor. No one looked at her. She was just another vendor in the blur of pre-wedding chaos. Her dress clung to her back with nervous sweat, and though the room was cool, she felt unbearably warm. The wedding planner, Abigail, dressed in cream satin and holding a clipboard like a weapon, approached without looking up. Put it on the center pedestal near the champagne tower, she said flatly, then glanced up. Oh, you're the baker? You look. She paused, eyeing Charity's stomach. Never mind, just don't touch anything else. Charity gave a tight nod and kept walking, her pride tucked behind her silence. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers sparkled like a galaxy frozen in time. Staff were rushing, florists fussing over petals, and violinists were rehearsing quietly in a corner. Charity maneuvered the cart to the pedestal, each step sinking her deeper into memories. She adjusted the base carefully, then started assembling the tiers. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, placing the dowels, stacking each layer, smoothing the final edge. Around her, people chatted, laughed, rehearsed. She felt invisible, but she preferred it that way. Every detail on the cake had been handcrafted. Tiny sugar flowers that matched the wedding theme, a golden ribbon cascading down the side, and at the very top, a delicate heart carved from white chocolate and meant to symbolize forever. Her lips curled bitterly. When the cake stood complete, Tall and glorious beneath the lights, she stepped back and took one long breath. She hadn't come to be seen, but her heart knew the truth was already pulsing under the icing. Charity was adjusting the final touches on the cake when she heard it. Laughter. Familiar, effortless, carefree. It floated from the arched entrance behind her, wrapping itself around her spine like a frozen rope. She turned slowly. Her breath caught. There, descending the stairs, was Rose, dressed in white, glowing with excitement. Her arm was looped through Mario's. And Mario, he looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. A little older, perhaps, but still with that quiet confidence in his step. Charity's world tilted. Her hands dropped from the cake. She felt a sharp flutter in her belly, panic or movement, she couldn't tell. The sound in the room dulled to a low hum as her eyes locked onto the scene she never prepared for. It's her, and it's him, together. Rose didn't see her, not yet. But Mario did. His gaze swept across the room and landed on her like a blow. His eyes widened, confusion twisting into disbelief. Charity stepped back, heart thudding. The cake stood between them like a monument to all that had broken. She turned swiftly, pretending to adjust something on the base. Her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped a petal. She couldn't let them see her like this, shaken, exposed. Her baby moved again, as if sensing the storm. A server walked by, glancing at her belly with curiosity. Charity offered a weak smile, praying her legs wouldn't give way. She had come for closure. Instead, she stood at the edge of a wound she hadn't realized was still bleeding. Her best friend was the bride, her ex-husband the groom, and she was the one who baked their cake. Charity tried to disappear behind the towering centerpiece of the cake, but Mario kept staring, his brow furrowed as if trying to make sense of the impossible. He whispered something to Rose, who was distracted greeting guests. Charity's pulse pounded in her ears. She backed away quietly, steps light as air. She turned toward the hallway that led to the kitchen and disappeared through the double doors. Inside the prep room, she leaned against the wall, her breaths shallow and quick. Why is he marrying her? She thought. Why didn't she tell me? The betrayal twisted in her chest like a hot blade. She clutched her stomach instinctively. We don't belong here, she murmured. We were never meant to see this. In the ballroom, Mario kept glancing toward the back of the room. His fiancée pulled him toward the photographer. Smile, Rose said sweetly, lifting his arm. Just a few more pictures before the vows. But Mario couldn't focus. He had seen her. And the way she looked at him, hurt, stunned, pregnant, was etched in his brain like a scar. He excused himself and moved toward the back, peering around the service area, but she was gone. Just then, Abigail intercepted him. Don't wander off now, we have a schedule, she barked. Mario forced a smile and nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Charity was here, and she wasn't just any guest. She was pregnant. And she had delivered his wedding cake. Nothing about this felt like coincidence. And everything about it felt unfinished. Inside the dimly lit prep room, Charity sank onto an overturned crate, her back pressed against the cold wall. Her breath trembled as she fought to keep the tears at bay. The bustle from the reception hall filtered through the swinging door, each burst of laughter like a cruel reminder that this wasn't a nightmare. This was her reality. Her hands shook, still powdered with sugar dust. She stared at her knees, her belly rising and falling with each shallow breath. How did I not see this coming, she thought. The betrayal hit her anew, heavier than before. She had let Rose into her heart, into her grief, and now Rose stood at the altar wearing a white dress that should never have been hers. Charity swallowed back a sob. Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Marcus. She didn't answer, but the sound of his worried voice from his last voicemail echoed in her memory. If you're in too deep, Charity, just walk out. Don't let them tear you open again. But it was too late. She was already torn. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she drifted back to that night, 2 years ago, when Rose sat beside her on the kitchen floor, helping her pack the remnants of a life unraveling. You don't need him, Rose had said, wiping tears from Charity's cheeks. You need peace. Charity had believed her. She'd let Rose take down photo frames and box wedding china, thinking she was helping to heal. But now she knew better. That was the beginning of Rose's quiet claim on her space, her memories, and now her man. A gentle knock pulled her back to the present. "Hello," a waiter peeked in. "Sorry, just checking on the cake status." Charity wiped her face, forced a nod. "It's done." But the truth was far from finished. The air was heavy with silence as Charity sat on the edge of a countertop, staring at the white linen draped over the catering trays. Her mind kept playing back the details of that night Rose helped her pack, only now with darker undertones. The way Rose lingered on Mario's name in conversation. The way her hugs grew tighter, her eyes a little too knowing. Charity remembered one specific night when Mario hadn't come home and she'd cried into Rose's lap like a child. "He's distant," she had whispered. "He doesn't touch me anymore." Rose had stroked her hair, whispering, "Maybe he's just overwhelmed. You're still enough." The words had seemed comforting then. Now they felt rehearsed. Was she already in love with him then? The realization punched through her like a hammer to glass. There had been a moment, Charity saw it now, in her kitchen months before the divorce, when she caught Rose looking at Mario too long during dinner. At the time, she brushed it off, but hindsight had cruel clarity. Rose had built her trust with tenderness, only to walk through its ruins wearing white. Charity stood, wiping her hands with unnecessary force. Her voice was low but bitter. "She was holding my heart while stealing the pieces." The kitchen door creaked open again, startling her. A young girl entered to collect a tray. Charity straightened and moved away from the door. "No one's allowed in here right now," she said quietly. The girl apologized and left. Charity walked to the cake and placed her hand on the base as if drawing strength from its structure. "Let them celebrate their perfect lie," she murmured. But in her apron pocket, she fingered the locket, the one she had prepared in silence, holding a sonogram and a handwritten note. That cake was no longer just a dessert. It was a message. The kitchen door opened again, not gently this time. A server poked his head in, startled by her presence. "Oh, sorry, ma'am. Didn't know anyone was in here." Charity stepped aside and smiled faintly. "It's all right. I was just leaving." The server nodded and held the door for her. She walked out slowly, the halls suddenly louder now, as if the building itself had awakened. She moved back toward the cake display, her pace measured, the weight of her secret pressing against her with every step. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused. Her eyes locked onto the cake. It stood like a cathedral among champagne flutes and sparkling roses. With trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the tiny velvet pouch. Inside it was the locket, silver, delicate, engraved with a single letter, J. She opened the base tier with practiced ease, removing one fondant panel she had intentionally left soft for this very moment. Inside, wrapped gently in food-safe paper, she placed the locket and note. The sonogram was folded carefully, positioned where the slice would be cut. Her fingers hovered for a second longer before sealing the panel with flawless icing, smoothing it over until it looked untouched. A sigh escaped her lips. It was done. No screaming, no confrontation. Just truth, baked in silence. She adjusted the final topper, a pearl heart, and stepped back. "It's beautiful," someone murmured behind her. She turned. It was Abigail, clipboard in hand, eyeing the cake with professional approval. "Thanks," Charity replied. "I'll be leaving now." Abigail barely looked at her. "Good. You've done your part." Charity walked away without looking back, her head high and heart raw. She didn't need to stay. The truth was inside the cake. They'd find it soon enough. As Charity walked past the corridor lined with gold-framed mirrors, she caught one final glimpse of herself. The image staring back at her didn't look broken. It looked composed. But only she knew the cost of that composure. She hesitated at the exit, the murmur of guests behind her now a muted, distant hum. She took one last breath, reached for the door, and heard it. "Charity?" The voice froze her mid-step. Deep, familiar, wounded, she didn't turn. Her hand gripped the handle tighter, her back stiffening. Mario's footsteps followed quickly behind. "Charity, wait," he called again, closer this time. But she pushed open the door without responding and stepped out into the sunlit driveway. She didn't owe him answers. Not here. Not now. Not after everything. Mario stood at the door, stunned. He hadn't imagined it. It really was her. The way she walked, the way she carried herself, it hadn't changed. But something about her felt heavier, not just physically, emotionally. It took a step forward, only to be intercepted by Rose, her fingers curling around his arm. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes watchful. I thought I saw someone," Mario replied, glancing back toward the parking lot. Rose leaned in, her voice tighter. "You're seeing me. Focus." He nodded slowly, but his heart was elsewhere. Charity had been here, and she had left without a word. But her presence lingered like perfume on old fabric, impossible to forget and harder to ignore. Inside the glass-paneled ceremony hall, guests were finally seated. Rose stood poised at the altar, veil draped over her shoulders like a crown. Abigail whispered instructions to the pianist, while Mario stood at the front, blinking under the weight of the moment. His hands were clammy, and his collar felt too tight. He watched the guests smiling, whispering, completely unaware of the emotional storm brewing beneath his skin. Every time his eyes drifted toward the back of the room, he half expected Charity to appear again, standing at the edge, watching with that unreadable expression. But she didn't. She was gone. And yet her absence screamed louder than any organ music ever could. Rose noticed his distant gaze and leaned over. "Nervous?" she asked with a soft smile. He hesitated. "Something like that." Rose squeezed his hand. "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" He looked at her. "No, just memories." The officiant cleared his throat, calling the crowd to attention. As they began to recite the vows, Mario's voice shook, barely audible as he repeated the promises. Each word felt like a lie wrapped in lace. He was here, saying forever to someone new, while a piece of his past walked away carrying more truth than this entire room. When he slipped the ring onto Rose's finger, he smiled on cue. But inside, something had cracked, and it wasn't going to be easily repaired. The ballroom glowed with celebration. Laughter echoed off the crystal chandeliers, and glasses clinked with champagne toasts. Rose and Mario walked in hand, now husband and wife. The DJ's voice boomed cheerfully as he announced the cake-cutting ceremony. Cameras flashed, guests circled, and there it stood, tall, exquisite, untouched. Rose beamed at the sight of it. "It's stunning," she said. Mario stared at it in silence, something uneasy creeping over him. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "She's always been gifted." Rose turned, puzzled. "Who?" Mario shook his head. "No one." A server handed them a silver knife. They held it together, hands intertwined, and cut into the base layer. The crowd clapped as they gently pulled out the first slice, but the room quieted when something metallic caught the light. Rose leaned in. "What is that?" she asked, reaching toward it. Mario frowned and stepped closer. A soft gasp escaped her lips as her fingers brushed a tiny silver locket embedded between layers of cake and parchment. "Was this part of the design?" Someone whispered from the crowd. Rose slowly opened it, and her breath hitched. "Mario," she whispered, handing it to him. Inside was a folded note and a tiny photo. Mario took it, eyes fixed on the image, black and white, unmistakable. Sonogram. His world tilted, knees weakening as he unfolded the note, hands trembling. The words were handwritten, simple, final. "You said I'd never be a mother, but you were wrong. Congratulations on your wedding. Jay." Mario stared at the sonogram in his hand as the clamor of the ballroom faded into a heavy hush. The tiny life captured in the black and white image pulsed louder in his chest than any music. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the note again, reading it more slowly this time, trying to absorb every word. The edges of the parchment were slightly smeared, likely from Charity's touch. A note so simple, yet it detonated like a bomb. "Is this real?" Rose's voice was barely above a whisper beside him, her eyes wide and stunned. Mario didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still trying to find breath, trying to understand how the woman he thought he had left in his past had carried forward with a secret so profound. "Mario, answer me," Rose pressed, her voice rising. "Is this your child?" Her question cracked something open in the room. Guests looked at one another. Abigail darted forward, trying to force a smile. "It must be some sick joke," she said, scanning the crowd. "A tasteless prank. I'll get rid of it." But Mario clutched the locket tightly. "No," he said hoarsely. "It's not a joke." He turned to Rose, his eyes finally meeting hers. "That's my child." Her face fell, every inch of her bridal joy draining like color from a painting left in the rain. "And you knew?" she asked, voice breaking. "You knew and still married me?" I didn't know, he said, the confession falling from his lips like stones. I swear I didn't know, but the damage was done. The celebration had curdled into disbelief. And somewhere in the distance, he realized Charity had left this behind not to ruin him. She had left it so she could walk away without speaking another word. A fork clattered against a china plate, sharp and final, breaking the stunned silence. One by one, guests began putting their utensils down, their excitement swiftly replaced by murmurs and uncertain glances. Rose stood frozen beside the cake, still holding a half-cut slice in her hand, untouched. Abigail rushed over, pulling Rose aside. "We need to do damage control," she hissed. "Smile. Pretend it's part of some dramatic gift reveal. Brides are doing that these days." But Rose wasn't listening. Her hand trembled, her lip quivered, and her gaze remained fixed on the sonogram Mario still held. "She was my friend," Rose muttered. "She was my best friend, Abigail. I helped her pick out her wedding dress. I held her hand through the divorce. And now I know why she disappeared." Abigail's face hardened. "None of that matters now. What matters is optics." But Rose looked at her with hollow eyes. "I lied to myself," she said quietly. "I told myself Mario had moved on, that it was okay because they were already broken. But maybe I was just picking at the leftovers of someone else's story." Meanwhile, Mario stepped away from the cake, clutching the locket, his mind racing. He no longer cared who was watching. The only thing that mattered was finding Charity now. They turned toward the entrance, urgency replacing shock. As he passed guests, they parted like the sea, whispers trailing behind him. "He's leaving? Did you see her note?" That poor woman. The air had changed. The wedding was no longer a celebration. It was a reckoning. And the man at the center of it all had only one thought: "I have to find her before it's too late." The wind outside was cool against Mario's face as he burst through the venue's front doors, scanning the driveway, the parking lot, the sidewalks beyond. There was no sign of her. The locket in his hand grew slick with sweat as he clutched it tighter. The valet passed by, and Mario grabbed him. "Did you see a woman leave earlier? About this tall blue dress, pregnant?" The valet nodded slowly. "Yeah, she left about 10-15 minutes ago. Didn't take a car, just walked down the hill." Mario didn't wait. He took off running down the sloping street, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the pavement. His heart pounded not from exertion, but from panic. What if she was gone for good? What if I never get to speak to her again? At the bottom of the hill, he spotted a figure sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench near the bus stop. Her back was turned, but he knew that posture. The quiet defiance, the worn grace. "Charity!" he called out, breathless. She turned slowly, no surprise in her expression. Just tired eyes and silence. "What do you want, Mario?" she asked softly, cradling her belly with one hand. "Why now?" He knelt in front of her, chest rising and falling. "You should have told me," he said, voice cracking. "You said you didn't want kids," she replied, looking away. "You said they'd ruin everything." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "This moment," she said calmly, "isn't about you. Not anymore." And in that moment, Mario realized this wasn't about apologies or explanations. It was about witnessing the woman he once loved become stronger without him. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, though only minutes passed. The world moved around them, cars drove by, children laughed in the distance, but Charity remained still, the curve of her stomach rising and falling steadily beneath her folded arms. Mario sat on the edge of the bench, hunched forward, unsure of what to say next. "I didn't know," he repeated for the 5th time, voice strained. "I would have, if I had known." "You would have what?" she interrupted, her tone quiet but sharp. "Married me out of guilt. Played house with a woman you'd already stopped choosing?" Her words weren't laced with anger, they were laced with truth. That made them hurt even more. Mario lowered his gaze. "I made a mistake, Charity, so many. But this child, I want to be there." Charity looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she arrived. His eyes were glossy, his shoulders slumped in humility. But she had learned something painful in the past year. Not every apology needs an open door. "This child will be loved," she said firmly, "but not through pressure, not through panic." Mario swallowed, his hands clenching the edge of the bench. "Then what can I do?" Charity shook her head. "Right now, Nothing. Let me breathe. Let me be. She stood slowly, brushing crumbs off her dress. You're not the villain, Mario, but you're not the victim either. She took one last look at the venue in the distance. This wasn't revenge, it was goodbye. Then she turned and walked away, not out of bitterness, but because peace sometimes requires distance. And Mario, for once, let her go. Later that night, Charity lay in bed, curled beneath a faded quilt in the dim warmth of her apartment. The nursery was half done, a crib still in its box, a mobile still wrapped in plastic. She traced slow circles on her belly, whispering lullabies she hadn't sung since childhood. A part of her had always dreamed of raising a child in a home filled with laughter and soft light. But dreams had shifted, reshaped themselves after Mario. She remembered the night he'd scoffed at the idea of parenthood. Kids are anchors, he'd said, after a long meeting and a glass of wine. They keep you from becoming anything. And Charity had fallen silent, heart sinking under the weight of his certainty. That was the night she knew she couldn't share motherhood with him. So, when the 2 pink lines appeared on her bathroom counter months later, she made a decision she would carry this child with love, even if it meant carrying it alone. Marcus arrived unannounced, bringing soup and silence. He didn't ask for details. He only looked at her eyes, saw the weariness, and wrapped her in a brother's hug. I take it the cake was delivered, he said eventually, a knowing half-smile tugging at his lips. Delivered and digested, she replied, exhaling slowly. He saw the locket. Marcus's brow lifted. And? Charity's gaze shifted to the window. He ran after me, but I didn't let him fix it with panic. Marcus nodded approvingly. Proud of you, sis. You're doing this your way. Charity smiled faintly, the ache in her chest softening. I didn't tell him because I wanted a reaction. I told him because I needed release. I carried the weight of his words for too long. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she whispered to her unborn child, You were never a mistake. You are my reason. Mario sat alone in the guest room of what should have been his honeymoon suite. The roses, once carefully arranged by Abigail, had started to wilt. The untouched champagne on the table sat warm and bitter, like the regret thick in his throat. He hadn't gone home yet. Couldn't. The silence in his house was too loud. He picked up his phone and opened his photo album. There, buried under work pictures and conference snapshots, was a single selfie, him and Charity at the beach, laughing mid-splash, her hair wild in the wind. That photo was taken just weeks before everything started to unravel. Back when he still thought love was enough to carry a marriage. Back before his own fears turned him cold. He tapped on it, zooming in to see the curve of her smile. She had always loved deeply. He had only loved conveniently. As the rain tapped against the window pane, Mario leaned back and let the memories wash over him. He remembered the night she stopped sleeping in their bed, the way her laughter had quieted, how she stopped talking about the bakery or decorating baby rooms. But now he knew she hadn't stopped dreaming. He had just stopped listening. And Rose. Rose had filled the silence he helped create. But it was never the same. Rose was easy. Familiar, predictable. But Charity, she was warmth. She was depth. She was the kind of love that required you to grow. And he hadn't been ready. Not then. Maybe not even now. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about saving face or salvaging appearances. He was thinking about the child, about showing up, about becoming a man worthy of being called father, even if he'd already lost the chance to be a husband. Rose slammed the bridal suite door behind her, the lace hem of her gown snagging on the edge of the dresser as she collapsed onto the velvet stool in front of the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, beautiful, hollow, betrayed. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. Her hands trembled as she pulled the pins from her hair, one by one. She planned this, she whispered. She waited until today, knowing it would ruin everything. Her voice echoed in the empty room. But the more she repeated it, the less conviction it held. Deep down, she knew Charity hadn't come to destroy her wedding. She had come to leave something behind, something honest. And the realization was unbearable. Because Rose also knew what had bloomed between her and Mario had begun in a graveyard over the ashes of another woman's heartbreak. A knock on the door shattered the silence. Rose, open up, it's Abigail. Her voice was brisk and patient. Rose didn't move. The knob rattled. Don't you dare start crying now, Abigail snapped once the door opened. We have press outside, guests waiting for answers. You need to get out there and… And what? Rose snapped, standing abruptly. Smile? Dance? Pretend I didn't just find out I married a man still tethered to someone else. Abigail blinked, but recovered quickly. You wanted this wedding more than anyone. Don't crumble now. But Rose was already walking toward the window. She looked out at the winding road where Mario had disappeared not long ago. I should have never touched what wasn't mine to begin with, she said quietly. Maybe I wasn't stealing. Maybe I was just a placeholder for someone he never truly let go of. And for the first time that day, the tears finally fell, hot and silent. Marcus paced in Charity's living room, arms crossed tightly over his chest as he waited for her to emerge from the bedroom. She'd been resting most of the day, the emotional exhaustion taking its toll. When she finally walked out in an oversized sweater and leggings, her eyes still heavy, Marcus stepped forward. I just want to know you're okay, he said softly. Charity nodded. Tired, but okay. He sat beside her on the couch and studied her face. He showed up, didn't he? She nodded again. At the bench, he looked lost. Marcus clenched his jaw. I should have gone with you. I knew it would spiral. Charity reached for his hand. It had to happen. I needed him to know, but I didn't need him to stay. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. I hate that he still has this power over you, even now. Charity gave him a weary smile. It's not power, Marcus. It's history, and history has weight. He looked at her belly, then back at her face. And what about this little one? Is he going to be in the picture now? She sighed, resting her hands on her stomach. He wants to, but I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't want to raise my child in chaos or confusion. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding. You deserve peace. You deserve to breathe without looking over your shoulder. He paused, then added with a soft chuckle, but if he steps out of line, I've got names of 2 uncles ready to teach him manners. Charity laughed lightly, the sound unexpected and healing. In that moment, she felt safe, not because the pain was gone, but because she wasn't alone in carrying it. That evening, Mario finally returned to his house, once filled with warmth, now sterile and cold. The lights flickered on with a mechanical click, revealing a space too pristine to be lived in. He wandered into the kitchen, drawn by something he hadn't thought of in years. In the back of the cupboard was an old cardboard box labeled in faded ink, Charity's baking tools. He pulled it out slowly, revealing a cracked heart-shaped cake mold, her favorite piping nozzles, and a photo tucked between 2 pastry bags, him and Charity decorating cupcakes, their faces smeared with frosting and joy. The sight knocked the wind out of him. He hadn't realized how many things he'd buried, how many memories he'd sealed away in dusty corners, hoping they'd stay silent. He placed the mold on the counter, staring at its chipped edges. It had been used for his birthday cake the first year they married, before ambition and fear made him cruel. That mold had held more than batter. It had held moments, promises, the beginning of a love story neither of them knew how to finish. He turned on the oven, instinct guiding him, and began mixing ingredients he barely remembered. Flour, sugar, eggs, he moved like a man trying to summon something long buried. The cake wasn't perfect. It caved slightly in the center. But it wasn't for show. It was for her, for him. For the version of themselves they had forgotten. As he sat in the quiet kitchen, the scent of warm vanilla drifting through the air, Mario finally let the tears come, not for what was lost, but for what he'd never truly appreciated when it was still his to hold. The first rays of dawn peeked through the thin curtains in Charity's apartment, casting soft gold over the nursery she was slowly putting together. The crib, newly assembled, stood quietly near the window, dressed in pastel sheets. Stuffed animals lined the shelf above it, most of them second-hand, donated by neighbors who had heard about her pregnancy through Marcus. Charity stood in the middle of the room, holding a small onesie in her hand, its tiny size almost laughable. "It's becoming real," she whispered to herself, fingers grazing her belly. The life inside her kicked gently in response, as if agreeing. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Nwodo, holding a bag of baby items and a steaming bowl of jollof rice. "You need to eat," she said, ushering herself in. You can't raise a strong baby on empty stomach and silence. Charity smiled warmly, touched by the woman's unwavering support. As they sat together on the small couch, Mrs. Nwodo watched her closely. I see calm in your eyes now, she said softly. Not the kind of calm that's quiet with sadness, the kind that comes after a storm. Charity exhaled, nodding. I still don't have all the answers, but I know I'll be okay. They talked for hours about motherhood, loneliness, and unexpected strength. Later, after the apartment fell silent again, Charity returned to the nursery. She picked up the baby book on the nightstand and turned to the first blank page. After a long pause, she picked up a pen and wrote at the top, Your name will carry light. It wasn't about erasing Mario or what they had. It was about building something new that didn't need to be defined by the past. In that small, quiet moment, Charity didn't feel like someone who had been left. She felt like someone who had begun. Rain poured steadily as Charity folded clean laundry on the sofa, the hum of the washing machine filling the quiet apartment. A knock startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she froze. Standing there, drenched from head to toe, was Rose. Her once pristine hair was unpinned, her eyes swollen from crying. She clutched an umbrella but didn't use it. I didn't know where else to go, Rose said, voice trembling. Charity stepped back wordlessly, allowing her in. They sat in awkward silence for a while, the air thick with unsaid words. Finally, Rose looked up. I didn't come to justify what happened. I came to tell you the truth, and to say I'm sorry. Charity's fingers tightened around the baby sock she was folding. Go on, she said, her voice cool but composed. Rose inhaled sharply. I never meant to fall for him. After the divorce, we stayed in touch. It felt harmless at first. Then one night, it wasn't. She paused, her shame visible. I lied to myself more than I lied to you. I convinced myself that you two were done, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. Charity listened without interruption. When Rose finished, she looked at her with a calmness that surprised them both. You didn't just take my husband, Rose. You took my peace. You were the one person I thought would never betray me. Rose wiped her cheeks, nodding. I know, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. It just needed you to know I wasn't proud of it. Charity stood slowly. I don't hate you, but I can't trust you either, and I won't let you near my child. Rose accepted it with a nod. No begging. No more lies. Just truth left in the doorway as she walked back into the rain. The hospital lights were too bright, the beeping too loud, but Charity focused on the rhythm of her breathing, gripping Marcus's hand as the contractions came faster. You're doing great, the nurse encouraged, while Marcus wiped her forehead with a damp cloth. Charity clenched her jaw, sweat pouring down her face. Tell the doctor this baby is coming now, she grunted, and Marcus dashed out to fetch help. Moments later, the delivery team swarmed in. Charity, though exhausted, centered herself. The pain was overwhelming, but she'd carried worse burdens in silence. She was ready to bring life into a world that had once tried to steal her light. Outside the room, Mario paced the hallway, clutching a bouquet of white daisies, unsure if he even belonged here. Marcus spotted him and nearly turned back, but paused. Their eyes locked. She doesn't need you to show up late and confused, Marcus said coldly. She needs peace. Don't go in unless you're bringing that. Mario nodded, swallowing hard. I'm not here to fix anything. I just want to see my child. Marcus hesitated, then returned inside. A cry pierced the air moments later, loud, strong, beautiful. Charity burst into tears, the sound slicing through her pain like light through fog. A nurse smiled. It's a girl. Charity looked down at the tiny bundle placed in her arms, and nothing else in the world existed. Not hurt, not history, just her and the heartbeat she'd carried alone. She pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead and whispered, You were worth everything. The maternity ward was quiet now, save for the occasional footsteps of nurses and the soft murmur of lullabies humming from the nearby intercom. Charity sat propped up on crisp white pillows, cradling her newborn daughter, wrapped in a soft lavender blanket. The little girl blinked slowly, her mouth parting in a sleepy yawn. Charity had never known her heart could stretch so wide. She studied the baby's tiny fingers, the faint trace of curls on her scalp. You have your father's eyes, she murmured, brushing a knuckle gently along the baby's cheek. There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. Not everything had gone as planned, but this moment was perfect in its own quiet way. For the first time in what felt like years, Charity felt whole. A knock at the door broke the stillness. She looked up, expecting Marcus, but it was Mario, standing in the doorway, holding nothing this time but his own vulnerability. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. Charity hesitated, then nodded. He walked in slowly, his gaze immediately dropping to the bundle in her arms. She turned the baby slightly so he could see her face. He took one cautious step closer, emotions brimming in his eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's strong," Charity replied. She didn't wait for anyone's permission to arrive. Mario chuckled under his breath, then grew quiet. "I don't want to confuse her life or yours. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of hers. However you decide that looks." Charity looked at him for a long moment, then down at their daughter. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said. "This isn't about us anymore. It's about her." And that was enough for now. 3 months later, the scent of warm vanilla and cinnamon drifted from Charity's reopened bakery, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. The shop was small, but it was hers again, filled with laughter, new beginnings, and the faint gurgles of her baby in a crib tucked behind the counter. Customers came and went, admiring her cakes, chatting about the softness of her sponge and the lightness of her frosting. Charity worked with ease, tying her apron with grace and decorating pastries with quiet joy. It was a slow afternoon when the bell above the door jingled and Mario stepped in, wearing a gray sweater, jeans, and a gentleness she hadn't seen before. In his hands he held a small, round cake box. "Trade?" he asked with a smirk. "I baked this myself. It's not great, but it's edible." Charity raised an eyebrow, smirking as she wiped her hands. "If it's dry, I'm throwing it back at you." They both laughed. He handed her the box, and she passed him a cupcake from the display. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a proposal. It was something softer, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were still part of each other's story, just written in a new chapter. Mario walked to the crib and peeked in, smiling at the baby girl. "She looks like you when she sleeps." Charity nodded. "She has your quiet stubbornness, though." He chuckled and stepped back, not lingering. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Mario." He stopped. "This time," she said, her voice steady, no hidden messages inside the cake. He smiled, hand on the door. "Then maybe it's finally safe to enjoy it." And with that, he walked out into the soft light of late afternoon, leaving Charity with peace, hope, and the sweetest kind of freedom, the life she had rebuilt from crumbs. Here's the Bible verse for the story, Isaiah 61, verse 3. "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." Meaning in context. Just like Charity, who rose from heartbreak, betrayal, and rejection, God's grace brings restoration to those who have been broken. Even when others discard or betray you, God still turns ashes into beauty and gives new beginnings to those who trust him. Moral of the story. Sometimes letting go isn't weakness, it's the beginning of healing. The story teaches us that you can find peace without revenge. True strength is found in standing quietly in your truth, even when it hurts. Betrayal doesn't define you, what you choose to become afterward does. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, but it does free your heart. When life crumbles, you can rebuild stronger, wiser, and more beautiful than before. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.